Hi everyone. So in this video, this is part 4 on our video series on the human reproductive system, and we're going to be talking about fertilization. So the pages in the workbook that this corresponds to is page 90 to 92. So when we're actually looking at fertilization, it basically is when a sperm and an ovum fuse. So we need to remember that the sperm is the gamete from the male reproductive system, and the ovum is the gamete or sex cell from the female reproductive system. And we need to remember that our gametes, so our sex cells, each have half of the necessary genetic information. Which in this case is going to be 23 chromosomes. So 23 plus 23 gives you the total 46. Now the zygote is the first stage in human development. Which we'll look at in more detail in our next video. So when we're talking about fertilization, it's the moment when the sperm and the ovum fuse. Now, fertilization happens in the female reproductive system, and it happens in the internal components of the female reproductive system, specifically in the fallopian tubes. But for fertilization to actually occur, the woman needs to be in their fertile period. And the fertile period is the time when the ovum is prepared for potential fertilization. Now, the fertile period is actually only 6 days. So there's only a 6-day window that fertilization can occur. And if sexual intercourse happens outside of this 6-day window, well, then fertilization cannot occur because the ovum is not prepared for potential fertilization. So for this to happen, ovulation needs to occur. And ovulation is when the ovum, and again, remember the ovum is the female sex cell, matures and is released from an ovary. So ovulation happens once during the menstrual cycle of an individual, and during this time, there's only one ovum that matures at a time. So if we look at our menstrual cycle, that's basically the cycle for basically the female reproductive system for the ovum to be matured. So ovulation is basically when the mature ovum is released. And the fertile period is only a 6-day window. And the reason why it's a 6-day window is because sperm can only survive outside of the male reproductive system for a total of 5 days. And the ovum can only survive a maximum 24 hours after ovulation. So what happens in the 6-day total, it's 4 days before ovulation, the day of ovulation, and then 1 day after ovulation. And the reason why is because sperm can survive for up to 5 days, and the ovum can only survive a maximum of 1 day. So 5 plus 1 gives you that 6. So it's only in this very, very small window that biological female can potentially become pregnant. Now, ovulation always happens 14 days before menstruation. So however long a biological female's menstrual cycle is, normally it's around 28 days, but the length of the cycle can vary. Ovulation always happens 14 days before menstruation. And the reason why is that once the ovulation has occurred, and if fertilization does not happen, then it takes 14 days for the endometrium which is again the tissue layer on the inside of the uterus to shed and for menstruation to take place. So it's extremely important to understand this concept of the fertile period, that it's only there during this 6-day window that fertilization can happen. Now, for fertilization to take place, what needs to happen is that the sperm needs to travel through the internal component of the female reproductive system. So if we're looking at that, we have, again, right here, the vagina. So it needs to enter the body through the vagina. It needs to go through the cervix, which again is the barrier between the vagina and the uterus, and then travel through the fallopian tubes to meet a mature ovum. Now, what's really important is that there's only one ovum that gets matured during each menstrual cycle, and it can be from either of the ovaries, because there's one ovary on the left side of the body, one ovary on the right side of the body. So the sperm, basically, when they get to the uterus and get to the opening of the fallopian tubes, there really is, a 50-50 chance of entering the right fallopian tube to fertilize the ovum. So as we can see, there are relative speeds for how fast or how slow a sperm can potentially reach an ovum. The fastest is around 45 minutes, and then the slowest is around 12 hours. But we need to remember that after ovulation, the ovum is only viable for 24 hours. So after this 24-hour time period, if the sperm reaches the ovum, but if it's past that 24 hours, then fertilization will not be able to take place. So if we're looking at our steps, our first step is that the sperm enters the body at the vagina. It travels up the uterus and enters the fallopian tube. And then the sperm fertilizes the ovum. And when we're talking about fertilizing, the sperm penetrates the cell membrane of the ovum and enters into the ovum. So if we're looking at this, fertilization happens at the fallopian tubes. It doesn't actually happen at the uterus. Once the fertilized ovum, which is then called the zygote, becomes a zygote, then that fertilized ovum travels to the uterus, but the actual fertilization happens at the fallopian tubes. So the sperm contacts the egg, the sperm enters the egg, and then the egg becomes activated. And lots of developmental changes begin. And one of the key developmental changes is that the cell membrane becomes impenetrable to other sperm. So that's the first reaction that takes place, because if multiple sperm manage to penetrate the ovum, it does cause instability because there's too much genetic information, and the fertilized egg cannot reproduce properly. And this is the key component, that the sperm and the ovum fuse, the nuclei fuse, and at this point, the fertilized egg has the complete genetic information necessary to produce a human offspring. And that basically happens. So if we're looking at our image right here, so we have a diagram of our ovum and our sperm. Now, the acrosome has enzymes necessary to penetrate, so to enter, the cell membrane. And then as the enzymes get released, the sperm can actually enter the ovum, specifically the zona pendicularis, and then we have the sperm and the egg binding, and then we have the fusion of the nuclei. And then the moment that the sperm penetrates, a whole series of biochemical changes happens on the cell membrane of the ovum to prevent other sperm from entering. So that's basically our video on fertilization. The next video in our series is going to be looking at the stage of pregnancy. Thanks for watching.